Michael Scott is a character who, while watching or when thinking about, seems rather static. And in a lot of ways, he is. Since most people these days have seen The Office plenty of times and now binge watch non-committally twice a year while playing Pokemon or scrolling through their phone or something, it's easy to think that archetypal Michael Scott in our head, probably the one we see around season 4 or 5, is the only one that's ever existed. But what if I told you that that wasn't really the case at all?
In fact, the Michael Scott that exits The Office in Season 7 shares frighteningly few qualities with the one we're introduced to during Season 1, though admittedly he does bear a lot of similarities to the one we see for the 5 seasons prior. A lot of this had to do with something known as the 10% rule that was used by the writers after the first season of The Office came to a close. Looking to emulate and sometimes even copy a lot of what made the UK version of The Office so successful, Michael wasn't really made to be the most likable character. So what they decided to do once this series moved past its first season was to implement a few changes, most notably the 10% rule, wherein everyone in the office had to be 10% nicer to Michael. If the other characters liked him a little more, slowly, over time, it would help us like him too. Another large change came with the decision to end episodes on a happier, more optimistic note as opposed to Season 1's bleak and sad tones they often ended on. Additionally, they changed Michael's look pretty considerably. His thin, slick back hair got a bit fuller and lost that overly gelled texture. He wore his jacket far more often and his collar loosened, allowing his face and body to appear less stuffy and bloated. He lost a bit of his paleness and in general just seemed a lot less mischievous. These sound like minor changes, and of course they were, but it's important to note that they were attempting to change what lay at the core of this character. His look beforehand was intended to make us find him sort of dislikable and sleazy, almost like a cartoon villain of sorts. We weren't entirely supposed to like him in Season 1, but now that the show is hoping to push past that limited series run of its British predecessor and become a full-time show, well, they needed to try to make their main character someone we could actually root for and learn to love. And thus, the design change, making him appear more professional and friendly, the show's slightly happier tone, and then the aforementioned 10% rule. From the first episode of Season 2 going forward, they were going to make Michael Scott 10% more likable. But I also think they took conscious steps to make him 10% better at his job, 10% nicer, and 10% funnier. It's really easy to infer this after watching the seasons back to back to back. 10% isn't a lot after all, and it's why moments like us feeling sympathetic for Michael towards the end of the Dundies doesn't feel like we're watching a whole other character. We're just seeing a side to him we didn't get to explore much of during Season 1. He is still being crass and obnoxious and crude, but now we're getting a little bit of insight into why he's like this. And because that reason is his desperate need to be liked and included, now we trade out those feelings of annoyance for pity and sympathy. And it's a lot easier to find reasons to root for someone you pity rather than someone you dislike. The 10% better at his job came more on the sales side of things, since I don't really think they ever show him being an overly effective manager. Maybe this is shown more by Michael just being a little less difficult to be around, thus his employees' lives are just a touch better and therefore they're more productive. But the sales side is really highlighted for the first time during the Season 2 episode The Client, where Michael manages to close out a massive deal largely just by being himself, while also utilizing some genuine charm and clever examples as to why Dunder Mifflin would be the right way to go. This also acts as one of the first true times we see Michael develop a relationship with someone that will eventually extend outside of the office with Jan, and it also greatly humanizes this character. The Michael Scott we've gotten to know so far seems so odd and off-kilter. How the hell would they ever make him the boss of anything? Well, turns out, he can actually make sales really darn well, and we see this time and time again throughout the show. His proficiency in sales is one of my favorite reoccurring elements in the show. I think it's handled really, really well. 10% nicer and 10% funnier were mostly concepts to work his dialogue and gags around. Instead of being cruel for cruelty's sake, now his goal is almost always to make the people around him laugh and like him more, and his success rate with this approach goes up only slightly. He offends people all the time. People don't laugh at his jokes, and they get extremely uncomfortable very often. But not quite as often as before. Season 2 closes with Michael slightly on the rise, someone we're starting to sympathize with and understand better. When Jim confides in him on the booze cruise, he genuinely does his best to keep it a secret for as long as he can. And when he lets the truth out, he is terrified that Jim will stop being his friend because of it. We think of him as an idiot when he tells someone, and we're mad at him on behalf of Jim. But when Jim confronts him, not even he can really be upset with Michael. A lot of that comes with the realization that whatever Michael did, and whatever reasons he may have had for doing it, the last thing he would ever do is truly try to hurt one of his employees. This is his family, despite how often some of them may tell him otherwise, and his heart is usually in the right place. Which brings us to the first episode of Season 3, entitled Gay Witch Hunt. This is an easy episode to think of Michael as being gross and obnoxious because of, well, the title of the episode, the plot, the final infamous kissing scene. But in reality, this episode's A-plot mostly centers around Michael doing his most misguided best to not only make Oscar feel more comfortable and accepted, but make the rest of the office feel the same way. He just wants to understand what Oscar is thinking and going through, and wants to understand what others in his office might be going through as well. It's intrusive and inappropriate, but his heart is kind of in the right place. The rest of the season gives us more of an insight on who Michael is, with all of his shortcomings on full display. He is unable to differentiate between two women of the same ethnicity, he proposes to his girlfriend Carol on a whim embarrassingly soon, he causes almost the entirety of the new transfer transfers from Stanford to quit practically immediately. He sends out naked photos of Jan to the entire office. He tries his darndest to ruin Phyllis's wedding because not even someone else's wedding was off limits in Michael's I'm the center of the universe headcanon. He almost kills himself by pretending to kill himself, but he also provides us with one of the sweetest scenes in the entire series at Pam's art show. He does everything in his little power to save the Scranton branch, driving to David Wallace's place in New York to confront him. He even tries to make all the employees feel welcome and loved, maybe even a little too much. But of course, it doesn't take much for him to come undone and ignore whatever good intentions he may have had in the name of feeling underappreciated or overshadowed, as shown time and time again, most notably during Phyllis's wedding. The season closes with Michael allowing his mind to run rampant to the point where it felt like a foregone conclusion that he would be getting the promotion to corporate, so much so that he sold his Scranton condo well before being offered the job. He even makes this goodbye all about him, which makes perfect sense. If Season 3 showed us what Michael Scott's flaws were, and it did, Season 4 showed us how they affected him. This season contains the infamous dinner party episode right smack in the middle, and everything before is a sad, tragic lead-up, and everything afterwards is a piteous look into what Michael is like when he doesn't have anything to distract him from how alone and sad he truly is. Something we get to see later down the line too, and funnily enough, both of these depressive, elongated episodes of his are broken up by the exact same thing. Or rather, the exact same person. Holly Flex. Holly is the third serious girlfriend we ever see for Michael. Whereas Carol often seemed more like an addition for humor's sake rather than growth for Michael himself, Jan offered a tremendous amount of character work for Michael in both a good way and a bad way. Aside from the most salient stuff regarding their relationship, Jan in a lot of ways acted as the antithesis to Michael. Able to outwardly remain extremely professional, while very slightly under the surface she was absolutely falling apart. Michael always appeared seconds from truly falling off the wagon, and I think he might have fancied Toby more than he fancied acting professionally. Through their relationship, we learn a lot about Jan and we see her change a ton. But this isn't about her, it's about Michael just the way he likes it. With Jan, Michael develops a little bit of a backbone and even demonstrates some good communication skills relating to things she does that makes him uncomfortable. He's pretty obsessed with her, however, and he puts up with a lot of shit before eventually it all comes to a conclusion, for the first time, in the Season 3 episode Women's Appreciation. And we actually get a wonderfully insightful moment here from Michael while he and the girls are eating at the mall. In this, you can see how hard it is for him to be vulnerable. Despite how often he makes himself look a little sad and pitiable, he really doesn't like to appear this way whenever he can help it. And there's a bit of a twisted courage in that, and it makes Daryl's line just a few episodes earlier ring extremely true. It's a line that's mostly played as a joke, but I actually think Daryl really meant it. We're proud of Michael for standing up for himself, but then we see a lot of the classic self-sabotaging Michael when he gets back together with her only a few episodes later, almost entirely because of her enhanced breasts. So back to Season 4 now. He's back together with Jan, and I think a good part of him is truly happy not to be alone. But things start to unravel pretty quickly. He has a tough go of it in the wilderness where he tries to prove he's capable of living off the land. It's mostly played as a joke, but you can see that Michael is battling some inner demons throughout this, and perhaps those inner demons are caused by the upcoming deposition he has with Jan and Dunder Mifflin in the very next episode. Michael is put in a hell of a spot here. Wanting to be loyal to Jan, he does what he can to help portray her as the victim. But as crunch time comes, he has to ultimately decide whether or not he wants to pledge his loyalty to his company or to his girlfriend. After both parties hurt him pretty severely in ways such as Jan bringing Michael's diary to New York and David Wallace admitting Michael was never seriously considered for the corporate position, he pledges his undying loyalty to his company, for reasons not even he is really able to articulate. The following episode marks the true death of their relationship as the events of the dinner party episode play out. I don't think I need to get into that episode too deeply. Before Season 4 ends, he emotionally grieves over the death of a chair model he never met, tries to have a fun night out with Dwight and Ryan, gets into an uncomfortable argument with Stanley, and then has a brief yet powerful reprieve from his depression in the form of Toby announcing he'll be leaving for Costa Rica before he's introduced to Toby's replacement, Holly. Holly. Although little of it is shown overtly, a ton of Michael's personal growth occurs as a result of the influence Holly has on him. Having said that, not a lot of it is truly done during Holly's first arc on the show, which lasted only 7 episodes. Yeah, 7 episodes, isn't that wild? She's introduced in the Season 4 finale and is transferred to Nashua in episode 6 of the next season. During those episodes, we see Michael, for kind of the first real time, take concerted efforts towards pursuing someone in a more appropriate fashion. We see how similar Holly and Michael really are, and whether out of spite or just the inability to continue waiting, probably both, Michael eventually asks her out immediately after Jan makes him promise he won't. Fuck you, Jan. They have an extremely wholesome relationship and we can really see how much each of them means to the other, but when Holly is transferred 7 hours away to Nashua, it's on the car ride there that Holly decides she doesn't think long distance will work. They break up, and Michael is once again alone, but now he knows better than ever what he's missing. His selfishness comes out during the surplus, buying a fur coat for himself instead of getting his office workers either a new copier or new chairs, and this is also when the 2-part episode Stress Relief occurs, where Michael hosts a roast for himself and then has a breakdown, leaving before returning to roast everyone back. Now, this is played as a large joke, and it's fair to think Michael didn't expect them to be so mean, and when they were, he just got his feelings hurt more than he expected, but it's also plausible that every single thing they made fun of him for were the very reasons he let himself believe Holly had left him. After this, he goes on his lecture circuit, ending in Nashua where he steals a piece of Holly's sweater, breaks down at her new boyfriend AJ, and then steals the USB containing Holly's unsent email she wrote for him. But note, he does not read it. He didn't want to violate Holly's privacy, even when it referred to him. His immature selfishness would have won out nearly every other time in his life, but he couldn't bring himself to betray Holly's trust like that. Of course, Pam reads it and confirms what we already thought, or at the very least hoped, that she does still have feelings for him. Now, what was or wasn't written in that letter and what Pam's true intentions were in regards to telling Michael the contents of it are a discussion for another time. But again, Michael's slight mature growth comes out during the company picnic in the finale, where he doesn't have an outburst at the sight of her and AJ together, and he doesn't even do anything immature or reckless while spending considerable alone time with Holly. Much like Jim waiting for Pam because...
And a lot of people told me I was crazy to wait this long for a date with a girl who I worked with, but I think even then I knew that I was waiting for my wife. So
Michael sort of felt the same way, and he had faith that if he was patient and respectful, he would win her back.
Holly, you and I are soup snakes.
There's also everything to do with the Michael Scott Paper Company wedge in there, but that's also a conversation for another time. We see a lot of Michael's pride, sense of self-worth, and recklessness during the beginning, including his several mental breakdowns, most notably in his condo with Pam, but we also see a lot of his savvy business tactics, his good people skills, and his cleverness during the negotiations. It's some good character work for Michael. After the company picnic, Michael ruins Stanley's life, although Stanley is written horribly in this episode and Michael is kinda extra dumb here, which is saying a lot. He gets territorial and scared of losing his power when rumors of Jim getting a promotion reach him as everything to do with Saber takes place. Aside from him generally overstepping and being uncomfortable with someone else being perceived as more powerful than him in the office, which causes him to more or less pout like a little schoolchild, the stuff with Saber is somewhat lackluster until Michael and their new CEO, Joe Bennett, have their conversation on the plane, where Michael says this.
Well, I'm going through a little bit of a rough patch. Whole year, actually.
Which we knew about already, but his depression from this could play a large role in the dumb stuff he's done and said over the last season. There's been big growth for him, but Michael is extremely prone to massive regressions. But the fact that he's regressing back to his normal ways, and not stooping far, far lower, does show that he's matured. Oh, there's also a kinda nice moment with Ryan where we see the faith and loyalty he has towards his friends, while he also shows some genuinely good, tough love and all that. This is a nice episode for him where he himself really isn't the main focus of the story. There's also his hatred of Gabe because Gabe is perceived as being the more powerful one in the office, but he works through that a bit with the help of Aaron. But then Holly comes back, and after some more pouting and sulking, he gets her back, and it's pretty clear right away that this is going to be endgame for them. I think this is where a lot of Michael's growth really starts to be put on full display. A few notable things happen here. Number one, during Michael's screening of Threat Level Midnight, Holly helps him do something that we've never really considered Michael might benefit from, taking himself a little less seriously. Constantly we are shown Michael's big grand ideas. Mike's cereal shack, Shoo La La, toilet buddy, chair pants, he's written screenplays, he's slowly writing a book, somehow I manage, he wants kids, wants a family, wants a yacht, wants... My point is that he expects big things from himself while taking very few steps towards achieving them, thus giving himself the constant feeling that he's not good enough. Holly helps him to learn that maybe it's okay if he doesn't achieve all of that. Maybe not everyone is meant to write movies or open up restaurants, and maybe just a nice simple life with a girl you love is enough. And only Holly is able to show Michael that that would be just as nice a life for him as being a millionaire on a yacht. It took me until about my 19th watch of this show to realize this, mostly because that episode is just so goddamn funny, but Michael laughing at his hard work alongside his employees and admitting, no, I just did something dumb, and not trying to save face at the mistakes in his movie is actually extremely big growth for the guy. The following episode is the one where Todd Packer attempts to come back to work in the office full-time, which Michael endorses to Holly very heavily. Todd Packer has always been something of a dark mirror to Michael Scott, the version of Michael in the darkest timeline, if you will. Many of the same qualities, though we're given absolutely none of the charm, sympathy, or even pity to make us feel anything towards him other than vitriol. Michael loves him, he considers him his closest friend, but in this episode we get to see how the things Todd does and says, many of the same things Michael might or already has done, affects the members of his so-called family. He's an ass, always and to everyone, but still Michael looks up to him and considers him a good friend. Until he trashes Holly. And there are a few ways to look at this. 1, insulting Holly is a no-go from anyone, and thus he shuns Packer for life. Or 2, Packer insulting Holly reveals to Michael that he's always been like this. It just took him hurting someone he cares about on a deeper level to finally show him that he's scummy and not someone he wants to associate with. And that takes us to Michael's decision to propose and move to Colorado with Holly. But what I find extremely fun here is how his last few days in the office turn out. Let's rewind to earlier in this video, talking about Michael potentially leaving for corporate at the end of Season 3. There, he makes his exit all about him. Well, what does he do here in Season 7? He spends his remaining days having heart-to-heart moments with each and every one of his employees, giving some of them gifts and giving some others memories, all while telling them that he was leaving later than he actually was. This goodbye wasn't about him. It was about this office and the people in it who had made his time there so special. He didn't care if he provided some big spectacle before leaving. He just wanted something to remember everybody by, and wanted them all to remember him. He just wanted to take a few more nice moments and memories with them to Colorado. And what happens when he gets cold feet about leaving? Holly's voice alone calms him down entirely. Holly has more of an impact on Michael's personal growth than anything else throughout his time at Dunder Mifflin, aside from perhaps the writing changes made between season 1 and 2, but those don't count here.
It's important to note that through essentially the entirety of the show, Michael remains a deeply, deeply flawed character. In any given moment, his need to be accepted, his need to be liked, his selfish and narcissistic qualities, and his inability to adequately react in social situations remains very prevalent. A lot of his growth comes from understanding who he is and how he affects other people around him, and the relationships he forms with people helps him to achieve that knowledge. You might think he's rude and crass and obnoxious, and that's fair. It's hard to argue that he isn't. But I think it's even harder to argue that his heart isn't usually in the right place, that he hasn't slowly grown over time, and that he doesn't love and care for his employees as if they were his true family. And isn't that enough?